3 years I was here, we only saw 3 men give their life to Christ.
Oh, wow.
Last year we saw 60.
Yeah.
So
big difference.
I mean, it was some fruit, but now we're seeing kind of that John 15 abundant fruit.
All right, guys, welcome to the Unwavering Mission podcast. I'm here with Bryan Keene, who is the director of ministry. So I wanted to have this interview for quite a while. So welcome, Bryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Awesome. So I wanted Bryan to kind of share a little bit of his story of how he came to be the director of ministry here at Brother Bryan Mission. So how'd you come to be the director, man?
Yeah, so I moved to Birmingham back in 2005 and was making my way through Beeson Divinity School here in town. And so was serving in my church, working, school, really busy, but I started getting mentored by one of the professors named Lyle Dorsett, who, point of fact, was in recovery himself and got his start in ministry up at the Denver Rescue Mission. So had a real heart for this type of work of those that had struggled and been mired in addictions and that society had given up on. And so he saw what God was doing in my life, and he really challenged me, Bryan, you need to go down and get involved in the work at Brother Bryan Mission. And I told him, man, I'm busy. I've got all these other things going on. There's just no way. And he said, if you want me to keep meeting with you, mentoring you, then you're going. So, So,
all right.
So it was not something that I had initially sought out, even though I had been involved around things like this, but grew up in a really rural setting. So the idea of urban ministry was just different, at least in this context. And so came down, met with the director at the time, and hey man, I'll push a mop, I'll do whatever you need. And he said, I need a Wednesday night preacher. Can you do that? I don't know how well, but we'll give it a go.
Yeah.
And so myself and ended up recruiting my roommate, we got involved together. And so we started on a rotation. That's how it began, is coming down on Wednesday nights, preaching. And what I fell in love with and what really attracted me to stay, at least initially, was I had been in a parish setting, a church setting for so long. And there are times where that we can get into I'm okay, you're okay, kind of the plastic veneer. And what I really appreciated here is we didn't have to try to convince each other that we had problems, right? I mean, if you showed up at Brother Bryan Mission, it was clear there were issues that had befallen you. And so we could begin to drop the mask and get real about our lives.
There's some authenticity that
absolutely
was only found here.
Yeah, that transparency here was really alluring. And so fell in love with that. And so was learning how to preach and learning, cutting my teeth on the guys down here, and they were gracious. But started developing relationships, and we had, started having some events at that time. We'd have them over to our apartment, and just trying to spend time and figure out discipleship. What does that look like? And learning more about some of the challenges and struggles they had faced. And so did that for a couple of years just as a volunteer.
So the mission's gone through some changes since then. And so how were you involved in that? Kind of how'd that come about? I know that's kind of a long story, but if you've got a little summary story on how that changed from what you came to at Brother Bryan Mission as a volunteer while you were in seminary to where you're kind of at right now. What does that evolution look like?
Yeah. So I got involved, and at that time, the mission functioned more like a Christian boarding home. And so we would have evening chapel. The guys would have to go a couple of those a week. But there really was no expectation in program beyond that. So you would pay a fee. You'd have to leave during the day. You could come back at night and then stay sober and come to a couple chapel services, and that's it. That's literally the only expectation they had in program. So there was no progression. There was no expectation that you would ever even leave the mission. And so when I came in, the board knew they wanted something more, but they weren't sure how to articulate what that might be. And so they thought, we want programming. And so when I came on staff in 2009, I believe it was, that fall, one of the things that we desired to do was create some programming. Because what I saw, and I had been doing ministry there for a while, and even that first year I was there, I was just trying to get my bearings, figure out what was going on. There was a lot of things happening inside the mission that were very unhealthy as far as staff, clients, just all the way around. And so a lot of it was trying to clean house and try to figure out, staunch the bleeding to where can we get a stable foundation to build on. But what we tried a 30-day recovery program
Okay.
and found it was woefully ineffective.
Okay.
We did share the gospel. We led some guys to Christ, but it was just not long enough to disciple them into
to have any real
a new
impact.
life. Yeah. So what we found is we'd send those guys right back to work, and then by third paycheck, they're right back in the same position. It didn't work. And so we had another change in regime and leadership. And as far as the executive director, fortunately in 2011, we had a gentleman come, Tom Zobel, who had been a mission director out west, retired, and thankfully came out of retirement. He was labeled the Nick Saban of Rescue Mission, so
Nice.
he came in and did the Alabama thing for us.
Yeah.
But gave us some direction, and so it gave me the freedom to start creating programming, and so that's what we did, and started what we now call the New Life Fellowship. It's a 9-month intensive discipleship and recovery program.
Yeah.
And have seen the fruit of that.
Right.
From that point. We've learned a lot, grown a lot, but the seed of that was born out of a desire. Georgia, the first 3 years I was here, we only saw 3 men give their life to Christ.
Oh, wow.
Last year we saw 60.
Yeah.
So
big difference.
I mean, it was some fruit, but now we're seeing kind of that John 15 abundant fruit.
Yeah.
And so like the Lord has been really faithful. But I think the intentionality in relationship, the intentionality in discipleship is one of the big things that's different now. It was really it wasn't intentional at that time. Things happened. The Lord still moved because His word was being proclaimed.
Sure.
But it was a very passive way of doing ministry.
I gotcha. And so through the course of that change, how many iterations would you say, and you don't have to give me a number, but just kind of give me an idea of how that went down for the program, how it is now when you started implementing? We see that there was a 30-day that now is a 9-month. I mean, how do you go from 30-day to 9-month? Was it just a jump to that, or did you slowly kind of increase it until you got to that 9-month sweet spot?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in doing research during that time, I came to the conclusion that the way that is concisely that our brains are greatly impacted by substance abuse. It alters the way that our brains operate. And what I was coming to the conclusion of, and it varies depending on substance, but it was around 6 months for the brain to heal from the trauma of addiction.
Okay.
And so it became a conviction of mine that I don't want to send guys out having to make long-term decisions about family, finance, faith, career, all of those big decisions that they're going to have to make, and dealing with triggers and recovery. Why would I want to send them out prior to them having all of their faculties at their disposal?
Yeah.
And so what we did is thought about, all right, well, what would a mature disciple of Jesus look like? And then we tried to build back from there.
Engineer it. Yeah,
right?
It's good.
And so we came to the conclusion that we wanted 6 months in-house, classes, counseling groups, and then we thought that 3 months to go find and retain a job would be a good...
Put it into place,
right?
Put it in action.
And be able to save money, put some seed money away, and that way they'd have the ability to make decisions about, am I ready to move out? Do I need a little bit more time? But we can walk through that. And that's where the 9 months was born. We've since backed up and added a month-long orientation and on-ramping. So one of the things that we saw as we built out the program is there was a pretty significant fall-off early in program of guys struggling with, do I want to go back to the streets? I've got 4 weeks clean, and my wife now says I can come back home.
I got it covered.
I'm cured. So we wanted to backfill there and have a better and more intentional on-ramping process for guys that were first entering in program, because it's such a critical time.
Yeah. And what would you say is, in the time you've been here, has been the most successful implementation, or what would you say is the most successful kind of thing that you guys have added into the program that you've seen the most successful?
Maybe 2 things. It'd be hard to say one in particular. One, I would say in adding that orientation piece, one of the things that we did is we share the gospel obviously consistently. I know you're well aware of that, but we share the gospel consistently with our guys. But what we did not do was walk through in an extremely concerted way very early in program. And so one of the things we did in the orientation is we added a class, literally, what is the gospel? And so we live in the South. 95% of the guys that come in, they're going to write on their application, I'm a Christian. In our interviews, 5%, generous 5%, might know what that actually means. And so we felt like, all right, well, if we know this is a critical period of time, these guys may not stay with us exceptionally long periods of time. What's the thing that we don't want to miss? the gospel of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so we added that on to the beginning of the program, and we saw almost a twofold change in guys giving their life to Christ.
Wow.
And we also saw our retention numbers go up.
Right.
And so I would say that's been one of the most spectacular changes, and it was almost immediate.
Okay.
And I think it did a couple of things. Number one, the class exposed them in a very intentional, methodical way, but it also said to a staff, this is the lifeblood of what we do. We want to see guys come into a saving relationship with Jesus, and then the rest of the program, we're wanting to teach them to live a disciplined life with Him as their Lord. That's a summation of what we do. The second piece that I think was a really
critical,
significant addition to our programming was when we added in a mentor program. During COVID, that got difficult, and so we're actually just getting that back off the ground, but we saw significant gains in discipleship and long-term outcomes with guys that were able to match up. So what we do is right before the guys get ready to go to work, we try to match our gentlemen with a local
business professional,
brother, a business professional, a Christian brother in the community that has a measure of maturity to come alongside, just in an intentional friendship to walk with them through the transitions. And so sometimes these guys are making decisions for the first time as a believer about how am I going to think about my career? How do I re-engage my family? How do I make amends with my children? What does a Christian father look like? If I'm married, what does a husband look like now that I'm trying to follow Jesus and lead my home and serve my wife? What does that even look like? And so a lot of things change. And so having somebody just to walk with them through that transition has been significant. And so really grateful for the men that have stepped up and made themselves available in that program.
Yeah. So basically the gospel and orientation, critical, and this mentor program. And you were talking about how you want to revamp this mentor program. And you just had a meeting yesterday with new mentors coming in, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And how did that go? And what would you say to those that are going to see this video that go, hey, I don't know that I could come down there and be on staff, but this mentor thing might be something I could get into?
Yeah, I think anybody that's walked with Jesus for any period of time, it's it. I mean, when we think about where is the word best received, it's in relationship. It's encapsulated in love, right? It's love in action. And so we want to be able to provide our men that intentional relationships. So you think about it in life, just in general, how many times do you have a relationship with somebody that they're fully invested in you and they're asking for nothing in return? It's rare, right, to have somebody in your corner. And so for our guys, at times they've been ostracized. They may not have healthy family systems to go back to. They may not have a strong social network outside of the mission. They are attending a local church, but they may not have developed real intimate relationships there yet, deep with brothers where they're walking in any kind of close proximity. And so for us, we're able to bridge the gap where that baton between what they're doing here and when they're transitioning out to walk with their local church, the baton of discipleship doesn't get dropped. And so for guys that make themselves available, it's just meeting on a regular basis and just walking with guys through life. And so you're not there to be a sponsor or a counselor, but to walk alongside and encouragement and support and really challenge them in their next steps and to think about their life from a Christian perspective, a distinctly Christian perspective. And so again, it's not overly complicated. It's really just making yourself available in relationship.
Yeah, just letting them know who you are and getting to know who they are. That's great. And so for those guys that have come through program and maybe didn't do as well, success, what do we call that? What do you see has been a key factor in that? What is it they need to look out for, a red flag they need to be willing to do? What would be the advice you give to a guy who is thinking about coming in a program that he needs to come to terms with in order to see success, that you've done this for so long?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, I talk about this with any guy I do like an orientation or intake process with. There are two indispensable things these are things I look for just in attitude and countenance when they're first coming in. I'm looking for, number one, is there a humility? You don't have to be a Christian to come here, but are you willing to be humble enough to accept correction and teaching? Okay. Clearly, if your way was working, you wouldn't be at our front door.
For sure.
Right? So I'm asking, are you willing to be humble enough to follow through on the program and the process as it's laid out? Ultimately, we're praying that you humbly come under the authority of King Jesus. And so God opposes the proud, gives grace to the humble. He's stiff-arming the proud. It's a shield that God's grace and love doesn't penetrate through, but when we humbly come to him, he's giving us the grace we need to sustain. So number one, are you humble? And that's going to be evidenced by coachable. Are you willing to yield to the authority of the staff here? And that's huge. Once you arrive and you get in program, a couple of things that are real key. Number one, I would say is not getting into any inappropriate relationship. The number one reason our guys get derailed from the path, it has been the number one problem. It is the number one problem. 20 years from now, if I'm still here, it will continue to be the number one problem. It's not females, but it's entering into an inappropriate relationship. Wrong person, wrong way, wrong time.
Yeah.
Any of those things could be factors. But entering into a relationship when I'm not ready to deal with that.
Right.
I'm not emotionally, mentally, spiritually ready to come under that load. And so that is the number one thing. If a guy will compromise there, them compromising in relapse or other destructive decisions are not
it's a slippery
far
slope
behind.
from there.
That's exactly right. And then lastly, I would say they need to aim for and commit to finishing. So we've seen outcomes over the last 12 years that if we can get a man to graduation, it's not a bulletproof vest, but we've seen over the last 12 years that 85% of our graduates continue to walk in long-term sobriety and recovery, continue to stay committed to their local church, all those things. As guys that are leaving, obviously those are things that we want to look for, staying committed to their local church, staying in the Word every day. Those are just part and parcel with a healthy life.
Correct. That's awesome. And last but not least, I would ask, what would you say to those that want to support and do support Brother Bryan Mission as the director of ministry? What would you say to those guys that kind of help us out or look to help us out in the future?
Yeah. Well, one, just thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your prayers. It is a vital ministry. The things that you pray for, and if you financially support us, I want you to know it's a good work. God is in this work. He's doing tremendous things. We're grateful to be here. I was just reading with some of our volunteers that are coming on as mentors yesterday, and we were reading from Isaiah 58, where it discusses how I don't want these fasts that you've had before, where you're just going through the religious motions. What is the fast that I want? It's to loosen the bonds of those that have been shackled. It's to break free those that have been oppressed. It's to lift up and restore the afflicted. And so what we're doing here at Brother Bryan Mission is we're bringing hearts into alignment with God's heart. And so as you give and pray and serve down here, you're in alignment with the heart of Jesus, to the good shepherd who's willing to go after the lost sheep, the ones that society has cast out, the one that can no longer return to his family. We're in alignment with God's heart to see that man redeemed and rescued and set free. And so it is the joy and privilege of my life to be here. And so we're grateful that you allow that, make provision for these things to happen. Yeah. And just, again, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bryan, for doing the interview. I appreciate you, man. Thank you guys for watching. That'll conclude this episode of Enter the Mission. We'll see you next time. God bless.